The 30th of April, 1945, 2:17 p.m., 8 meters below the Reich Chancellery, Berlin. The air in the Führer bunker smelled of death and diesel fuel. Captain Alexei Volkov pressed his back against the cold concrete wall, listening to the distant thunder of Soviet artillery pounding the streets above. Dust rained from the ceiling with each explosion. He had exactly 53 minutes before Hitler's reported suicide at 3:30 p.m. According to the intelligence his handler had beaten out of a captured SS officer 3 days ago. But Alexei wasn't here to witness history. He was here to steal it. His hand moved to the false Nazi insignia on his stolen uniform, the lightning bolts of the SS that made his skin crawl. The uniform had belonged to Hauptsturmführer Klaus Richter, a man Alexei had killed with his bare hands in a burned-out pharmacy 2 blocks from here. They were the same height, the same build. Klaus's papers were now Alexei's papers. Klaus's identity was now Alexei's mask. The corridor stretched ahead, lit by flickering bulbs that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Somewhere deeper in this concrete tomb, Adolf Hitler was preparing to leave the world stage. But Moscow didn't care about Hitler's death. They cared about what came after. The Phoenix Project. 3 weeks ago, Soviet intelligence had intercepted a coded message from Martin Bormann to an unknown recipient in South America. Just 2 words, repeated 3 times. Phoenix rises. Phoenix rises. Phoenix rises. Then 5 days ago, a dying SS general had whispered something to a battlefield medic. Something about 50 years, and the Fourth Reich will return when the world forgets. Alexei's orders were clear. Find the Phoenix Project. Photograph everything. Get out alive if possible. He moved forward, his boots silent on the concrete. The layout of the bunker had been memorized from defector reports. 30 rooms spread across 2 levels, connected by a narrow staircase. Hitler's private quarters were in the upper level. The conference rooms and staff quarters occupied the lower level. But there was something the defector reports hadn't mentioned, something Alexei had noticed immediately upon entering. The bunker was too quiet. Yes, he could hear muffled voices behind closed doors. Yes, there were guards at key positions. But where was the chaos? Where was the panic of a regime's final hours? Instead, there was an eerie calm, almost businesslike. People moved with purpose, not desperation, as if they were preparing for something. Alexei rounded a corner and nearly collided with a young woman in a crisp secretary's uniform. She couldn't have been more than 25, with blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that were entirely too alert for someone facing the apocalypse. "Heil Hitler," she said automatically, her gaze sweeping over his uniform, checking his rank. "Heil Hitler," Alexei replied, his German flawless, perfected through 2 years of deep cover work in occupied Poland. "I'm looking for the map room." Bormann's orders. The mention of Bormann's name had the desired effect. Her expression shifted from suspicion to submission. "Down this corridor. 3rd door on the left." "But," she hesitated, "I thought all the final briefings were complete?" Alexei smiled coldly. "There is always one more briefing." She nodded and hurried past him, her heels clicking away into the depths of the bunker. The map room door was unlocked. Inside, he found what remained of Hitler's war, a table covered with maps, showing the Soviet advance, marked in red, like a disease consuming Germany from the east. British and American forces pressed from the west in blue. Berlin sat in the center, a small island of black, shrinking by the hour. But Alexei wasn't interested in the maps. He closed the door behind him and moved to the filing cabinets along the wall. His fingers worked quickly, rifling through folders marked with stamps and seals. Reports on troop movements, supply manifests, desperate contingency plans that would never be executed. Nothing about Phoenix. He was about to close the 3rd drawer when he heard a voice from the corridor, sharp and commanding. A voice he recognized from 100 propaganda broadcasts. Hitler's voice. But Hitler was supposed to be in his private study, preparing for his final act. What was he doing in the corridors? Alexei froze, his hand still on the drawer. The voice grew louder, closer, accompanied by the sound of boots. Multiple sets of boots. Must be completed within the hour, Hitler was saying, his Austrian accent unmistakable. Everything depends on the timing. The Russians must believe. The words cut off as the footsteps passed the map room door, without stopping. Alexei exhaled slowly, his heart hammering. The Russians must believe what? He eased the door open a crack and peered out. Hitler's hunched figure was moving away down the corridor, flanked by 2 SS guards and another man. Alexei recognized Dr. Ludwig Stumpfegger, Hitler's physician. They turned a corner and disappeared. But something was wrong. Alexei had studied every photograph, every film reel of Hitler available to Soviet intelligence. He knew the Führer's walk, that distinctive shuffle, the tremor in his left hand from Parkinson's disease, the way he leaned slightly forward, as if carrying an invisible weight. The man who had just passed had walked differently, straighter, stronger, younger. A cold realization began to form in Alexei's mind. He stepped back into the map room and forced himself to think logically. If what he suspected was true, then everything, the intelligence, the timeline, the reported suicide, all of it could be theater. A carefully orchestrated deception, which meant the Phoenix Project wasn't just a plan for the future. It was happening now. Alexei pulled out the miniature camera hidden in his belt buckle, a marvel of Soviet engineering that could capture documents in low light. He began photographing everything in the room, working methodically despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. That's when he saw it. Behind a large map of Greater Germany, partially hidden, was a smaller map. Alexei moved the larger map aside and felt his blood turn to ice. It was a navigation chart showing a route from northern Germany to the coast, then by submarine across the Atlantic to Argentina. Handwritten notes in the margins, detailed coordinates, timing, and fuel calculations. At the bottom, stamped in red ink, Operation Himmelfahrt, Geheim Operation Ascension, IMC. Next to it was a personnel list, 27 names, scientists, engineers, intelligence officers. At the top of the list, Dr. Werner von Braun, Dr. Walter Dornberger, rocket scientists. And at the very bottom, a note in neat handwriting. Primary asset secured. Secondary asset will arrive at 1,430 hours for final preparation and transport. Both must be in position before the grand finale begins. Phoenix cannot rise without proper ashes. Alexei photographed it all, his hands trembling slightly. This was it. This was bigger than Phoenix. This was... The door burst open. Alexei spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for the pistol hidden beneath his uniform jacket. But he stopped when he saw who stood in the doorway. It was the blonde secretary from earlier. But now she held a Walther P-38 pistol aimed directly at his chest. Her eyes were cold, professional. Hauptsturmführer Richter has been dead for 3 days, she said calmly. We found his body this morning, which means you're either a deserter, wearing his uniform, or something much more interesting. Alexei's mind raced through options. The camera was still in his hand. The documents were photographed, but he'd never get them back to Moscow if he died here. I can explain, he began. Don't bother, she interrupted. I saw what you were photographing, which means you're not a common deserter. You're NKVD, or maybe GRU, Soviet intelligence. Either way, she took a step forward, and Alexei tensed, ready to make a desperate move. But then she did something unexpected. She lowered the gun slightly and glanced behind her into the corridor. When she looked back at him, there was something new in her eyes. Fear. You need to get out of here, she whispered urgently. Right now. Forget whatever you came to find. Forget Phoenix. Just run. Why? Alexei asked, his own voice dropping to a whisper. What's happening here? Something worse than you can imagine, she said. Hitler isn't going to die today. He never was. The man they're going to find in his study this afternoon. won't be him. It will be Gustav Weller, a double from Munich who's been living in secret quarters for 6 months. The real Hitler. She paused, as if the words were too terrible to speak. The real Hitler is leaving. Tonight. And he's taking something with him. Something that will let the Reich survive underground, in secret, until the world forgets what happened here. The Phoenix Project. Alexei breathed. She nodded. But it's not just a project. It's a network. People, resources, technology that will be hidden across the globe. In 50 years, maybe less, they'll emerge. Different faces, different names, but the same ideology, the same hatred. And no one will recognize them because everyone will think Nazism died in this bunker. Why are you telling me this? Alexei asked. If you're SS. I'm not SS, she interrupted. I'm just someone who was in the wrong place at the wrong time and learned too much. They think I'm loyal, but She trailed off, then hardened her resolve. I can't let this happen. I won't, but I can't stop it alone. You need to tell your people. Tell them Hitler survives. Tell them to watch for Phoenix. Before Alexei could respond, voices echoed from the corridor again. Close. Too close. The service tunnel, she hissed. Behind the boiler room, there's an emergency exit that leads to the U-Bahn tunnels. Go. Now. Come with me, Alexei urged. She shook her head. They'll know someone warned you. Someone has to stay. Someone has to make sure the double plays his part, or they'll know their plan is compromised. A sad smile crossed her lips. Besides, I always wondered what it would feel like to be a hero, even a small one. What's your name? Alexei asked. Anna, she said. Anna Fisher. Will you remember it? I will remember, Alexei promised. She pointed down the corridor. Go left, then down the stairs. The boiler room is... A shout erupted from somewhere behind them. Intruder! There's an intruder in the west corridor! Anna's face went pale. They found Richter's real ID papers. They know. She raised the pistol again, but this time she pointed it at the ceiling. I'll slow them down. Run. She fired 3 shots into the air, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Alarms began to wail throughout the bunker. Alexei ran. Behind him, he heard Anna's voice shouting convincingly. He went toward the eastern exit, seal the upper level, buying him precious seconds with her deception. He flew down the corridor, past startled faces, past guards who were still trying to understand where the threat was coming from. He found the stairs, took them 3 at a time, burst into the boiler room where 3 workers stared at him in shock. Stay back, he shouted in German, waving his stolen pistol. They scattered. He found the service tunnel behind a rack of tools, just as Anna had said. The metal door was locked, but a desperate shoulder charge, and it gave way. He squeezed into the narrow passage, pulling the door shut behind him. Darkness swallowed him whole. Behind him, muffled by concrete and steel, he heard gunfire. Short, sharp reports that echoed through the bunker's corridors. 7 shots. Then, silence. Alexei closed his eyes for a moment in the darkness, thinking of a young woman named Anna Fisher who had chosen to be a hero in the final moments of the Third Reich. Then he moved forward, crawling through the service tunnel toward the promise of the U-Bahn system and eventual escape. The camera containing proof of Operation Ascension was still in his pocket. Anna's sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. But as he crawled through the darkness, one thought consumed him. If Hitler was escaping, if Phoenix was real, if everything about the 30th of April 1945 was a carefully staged lie, then the war wasn't ending today. It was simply going underground, and somewhere above him, in a bunker that would soon be a tomb for a man who wasn't Hitler, the greatest deception of the 20th century was about to begin. The 30th of April 1945, 3:45 p.m. U-Bahn Tunnel, 200 meters from the Reich Chancellery. Alexei emerged from the service tunnel into the abandoned subway system, his uniform torn and soaked with condensation. The U-Bahn had been closed for weeks, its tunnels now serving as makeshift shelters for Berlin's desperate civilians. In the dim emergency lighting, he could see them, hundreds of people huddled against the walls. Old men, women, children, with hollow eyes. They barely looked at him as he stumbled past, just another soldier in a city full of ghosts. He found a recessed maintenance alcove and collapsed against the cold tile wall, pulling out the camera to verify the film was intact. It was. Every frame of Operation Ascension was preserved. Anna's sacrifice had not been in vain, but her words echoed in his mind. "They'll know someone warned you," which meant they knew their plan was compromised. Would they abort, change the timeline, or would they proceed anyway, betting that one Soviet spy couldn't possibly convince his superiors of such an audacious deception? Alexei was still catching his breath when he heard footsteps, not the shuffle of refugees, but the sharp click of military boots, coming from the direction he'd fled. He pressed himself deeper into the shadows, hand on his pistol. Two SS officers emerged from the service tunnel entrance, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. They were hunting him. But what caught Alexei's attention was their conversation, carried clearly in the tunnel's acoustic chamber. "Doesn't matter if the spy escapes," the first one was saying. "The Soviets won't believe him. Think about it. Hitler commits suicide. The bunker falls. They find a burned body. What evidence does one spy have? Some photographs? They'll think it's disinformation." "What about the woman?" the second officer asked. "Fisher? Dead. She tried to help him escape. We shot her in the boiler room." A pause. Shame. She was efficient. Alexei's jaw clenched. Anna Fisher. He would remember that name. "When does Weller go in?" the second officer continued. "In 15 minutes. The Fuhrer, the real Fuhrer, is already in the supply truck heading north to Tempelhof Airport. By tonight, he'll be aboard U-534 heading to the Atlantic. Weller will be in the study by 4 p.m. The cyanide is already prepared. Eva Braun's double took hers an hour ago. Eva Braun had a double too. And the bodies? We'll burn them as planned. By the time the Soviets reach the bunker, they'll find exactly what they expect to find: 2 charred corpses. The dental records we planted will match. It will be perfect. The officers moved past Alexei's hiding spot, their flashlights sweeping but not finding him. They continued down the tunnel, heading toward another exit. Alexei waited until their voices faded completely, then pulled out a small notebook and began writing frantically. Every detail, every name, the timeline, the submarine designation, U-534. The airport, Tempelhof. But even as he wrote, he understood the terrible logic of what the first officer had said. Who would believe this? The story of Hitler's death was already written in the minds of the Allied command. They expected him to die today. They wanted him to die today. A Soviet spy claiming the body was a fake would sound like propaganda, like Stalin trying to keep the myth of Hitler alive to justify continued aggression in Europe. The perfect crime wasn't about hiding the body. It was about giving everyone exactly the body they wanted to find. Alexei needed more than photographs. He needed Gustav Weller. The 30th of April, 1945. FOD, 4:23 p.m. The Führer bunker. Hitler's study. Getting back into the bunker was easier than getting out. The chaos of the intruder alert had subsided into a grim finality. Guards were fewer, less alert. Everyone was focused inward, on the drama unfolding in Hitler's private quarters, the moment history was supposedly being made. Alexei had changed his approach. He'd torn his uniform further, smeared his face with dirt, and affected the 1,000-yard stare of a shell-shocked soldier. No one questioned traumatized men in Berlin anymore. There were too many of them. He slipped back through a damaged section of the upper bunker entrance, past distracted guards, and made his way toward Hitler's private quarters. The study door was closed, but voices came from within. Alexei found a service closet directly across the corridor, a cramped space filled with cleaning supplies. He wedged himself inside, leaving the door open just a crack. And then he waited. At 4:35 p.m., the study door opened. Dr. Stumpfegger emerged first, followed by two men Alexei didn't recognize. They were carrying something wrapped in a blanket, a body-sized bundle that they handled with practiced efficiency but no particular reverence. Then came the man Alexei had been waiting to see. Gustav Weller was thin, with dark hair combed in the same style as Hitler's. The resemblance was remarkable from a distance, but up close, Alexei could see the differences. The nose was slightly wrong. The eyes, though they held a similar intensity, were too young. This man was perhaps 40, not 56, but he wore Hitler's uniform. He moved with Hitler's posture, and on his face was an expression of terrible resignation. "How long?" Weller asked, his voice a perfect imitation of Hitler's Austrian accent. "The cyanide acts within seconds," Stumpfegger replied. "You won't feel." "I know what cyanide does," Weller interrupted. "I mean, how long before they find us?" "The Soviets will reach this level within 3 to 4 hours. We'll set the fire within 30 minutes of afterward. By the time they arrive, identification will be nearly impossible. The dental records we've prepared will do the rest." Weller nodded slowly. He looked around the corridor, at the concrete walls that would become his tomb, and laughed bitterly. "I spent 6 months training to be him." Learning his voice, his mannerisms, his way of thinking. Do you know what that does to a man? To spend half a year becoming a monster? "You're serving the Reich," one of the other men said stiffly. "The Reich is dead," Weller replied. "We're just arranging the funeral." He turned back to Stumpfegger. "My family. You promised. They're already in Switzerland, under new names, with sufficient funds to live comfortably." "You have my word." "The word of a Nazi," Weller said softly. "How comforting." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph. Alexei couldn't see it clearly, but he saw Weller's expression soften. A wife? Children? Whatever bargain this man had struck, whatever had driven him to this terrible sacrifice, it was there, in that photograph. "One question," Weller said, still staring at the photo. "Did he really escape, the Führer? Or is this all just theater to hide the fact that he was too much of a coward to face justice?" Stumpfegger's face remained impassive. "He escaped. Operation Phoenix is real. In 50 years, perhaps less, the Reich will." "I don't care," Weller interrupted. He tucked the photograph back into his pocket. "I don't care about Phoenix or the Fourth Reich or any of it. I just need to know my death means something, even if it's just buying my family's freedom. It means everything," Stumpfegger assured him. "History will remember this day. The world will believe justice was served." "Justice," Weller repeated, tasting the word. "Yes, I suppose that's one way to look at it." He walked back into the study. Stumpfegger and the other men followed. The door closed. Alexei counted the seconds in his head. 30, 40, 50. At 67 seconds, he heard a muffled sound, something between a gasp and a cough. Then, silence. The door opened again. The men emerged, moving with practiced efficiency. They carried 2 more blankets now, and this time, they didn't bother to conceal what was inside them. 2 bodies. Gustav Weller and the woman who had played Eva Braun in history's most grotesque theater. "Get them to the garden stairs," Stumpfegger ordered. "We'll burn them there. Make sure the petrol is ready." They moved past Alexei's hiding spot, and he saw Gustav Weller's face through the gap in the blanket. The eyes were open, staring at nothing. The mouth was frozen in the rictus of cyanide poisoning. A good man, perhaps, or at least a desperate one. Now dead so that a monster could escape justice. Alexei waited until they were gone, then slipped from the closet. He had to see the study, had to document what he could. The door was unlocked. Inside, the room was surprisingly modest. A desk, a sofa, a portrait of Frederick the Great on the wall. On the desk, Alexei found what he was looking for. A document, hastily left behind or deliberately abandoned. It was titled Phoenix Protocol, Final Implementation, and it contained everything: names, dates, locations, a network spanning 5 continents, safe houses in Argentina, Paraguay, Chile, hidden bank accounts in Switzerland, technology transfers to Egypt and Syria, scientists relocated to South America and the Middle East, and at the center of it all, a timetable. The Fourth Reich would not rise immediately. It would wait, infiltrate, adapt. By the 1,990 seconds, the children of the original conspirators would be in positions of power: corporate executives, politicians, military officers, all hiding in plain sight, all waiting for the signal. The final page made Alexei's blood run cold. The greatest victory is not the one achieved through force, but through patience. Let the world forget. Let them grow complacent. Let them believe. Nazism died in the ashes of Berlin. And when they have forgotten, when they no longer watch the shadows, Phoenix will rise from those ashes, and the Reich will be reborn in a form they will not recognize until it is too late. It was signed with a single initial, H. Hitler himself had written this. Alexei photographed every page, his hands shaking with the weight of what he was documenting. This wasn't just a conspiracy. It was a blueprint for a slow-motion conquest that would take generations to complete. He was nearly finished when he heard voices approaching again. Quickly, he returned the document to the desk exactly as he'd found it and slipped back into the corridor. He had what he needed. Now he just had to survive long enough to get it to Moscow. But as he made his way back toward the emergency exits, one thought haunted him. If this was real, if Phoenix was real, then exposing it would require proof that no one would want to believe. He would need more than photographs. He would need Gustav Weller's body before they burned it beyond recognition. The 30th of April, 1945, FSF, 5:47 p.m. Reich Chancellery Garden. The smell of petrol and burning flesh filled the air above the Reich Chancellery. Alexei watched from a destroyed 4th-floor window of the adjacent Foreign Office building using a pair of stolen binoculars. Below, in the bombed-out garden, he could see the bonfire where Gustav Weller's body was being consumed by flames. Dr. Stumpfegger and 3 SS officers stood watching, their faces illuminated by the orange glow. They were making Hitler's death look convincing. The charred remains would be discovered by Soviet soldiers within hours. The dental records would match. The world would accept the narrative, and the real Adolf Hitler would be halfway to the coast. Alexei had failed to secure Weller's body. It had been impossible without revealing himself. But he had something better now. The Phoenix Protocol. Complete documentation of the most ambitious criminal conspiracy in human history. The question was, would anyone believe him? His answer came sooner than expected. A Soviet artillery shell struck the chancellery wall, showering debris into the garden. The SS officers scattered, leaving the fire burning. The Red Army was here. The bunker would fall within the hour. Alexei made his way down through the ruined building, moving toward the Soviet lines. He had to reach his handler, had to get the photographs and documents to Moscow before Hauptsturmführer. Alexei froze. The voice came from behind him, speaking German. He turned slowly. It was one of the SS officers from the garden, the same one who had carried Weller's body. The man's uniform was covered in ash, and he held a Luger pistol at his side. Not quite aimed, but ready. "You're the intruder," the officer said. It wasn't a question. The one who got away. Alexei's hand moved toward his own weapon, but the officer shook his head. "Don't," he said. "I'm not here to kill you." "Then why are you here?" The officer glanced behind him, toward the burning garden. "Because I want to make sure you succeed." Alexei stared at him, uncomprehending. My name is Friedrich Hoffmann, the officer continued. SS Obersturmführer. I've served the Reich for 12 years. I've done things. He trailed off, his face contorting. Things I can never take back. Things that will haunt me until I die. Then surrender, Alexei said. Face justice. Justice? Hoffmann laughed bitterly. There is no justice for men like me. Only death or hiding. But before either comes, I want to do one thing right. I want to make sure the truth gets out. You know about Phoenix. I helped create it, Hoffmann said. I spent 2 years compiling the lists, securing the safe houses, moving the gold. I know every name, every location, every piece of the network. And I've realized something: we weren't building a future. We were building a prison that would trap the world in endless conflict. For generations. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather folder. This is my insurance policy, he said. A complete copy of the Phoenix network. More detailed than anything you found in the bunker. Names, photographs, bank account numbers, code words, everything. He held it out to Alexei. Why? Alexei asked, not taking it yet. Why turn against everything you've served? Because I met Gustav Weller, Hoffmann said softly. 3 months ago, when we brought him to the bunker. He was a theater actor from Munich. Not political, not a Nazi. Just a man who happened to look like Hitler. We threatened his family, his wife, his 2 daughters. We gave him a choice: die for the Reich or watch his family die. What choice is that? He pushed the folder into Alexei's hands. He chose to save them. And today, I watched him walk into that study, knowing he would never leave it, knowing his face would be burned beyond recognition, knowing his name would be forgotten while Hitler's would live in infamy. Hoffmann's voice cracked. He was a better man than any of us, and we murdered him to save a monster. Hitler escaped, Alexei said, but we can still stop Phoenix. If the world knows. The world won't know, Hoffmann interrupted. That's the genius of it. Stalin will claim Hitler escaped to protect Soviet interests. The British and Americans will insist he died to close the chapter on the war. Everyone will believe what they want to believe. Truth won't matter. Then what's the point of this? Alexei held up the folder. The point is documentation, Hoffmann said, so that in 50 years, when they emerge, when Phoenix rises, someone will be able to trace them back to their origin. Someone will have proof. He looked at Alexei intently. Your Soviet intelligence. You'll survive this war. You'll go back to Moscow. Keep those documents safe. Copy them. Hide them in your archives. And when the time comes when you see the signs of Phoenix rising, you'll know what to do. A explosion rocked the building. Closer this time. Soviet troops were advancing rapidly. You need to go, Hoffmann said. The Red Army will be here in minutes. What about you? Hoffmann smiled grimly and raised his Luger to his own temple. I go to join Gustav Weller. Perhaps wherever we end up. I can tell him I tried to make his death mean something. Wait, Alexei began, but Hoffmann shook his head. There's no redemption for me. I know what I've done, but maybe this one act can tip the scales. He paused. Tell whoever needs to know. Phoenix is real. The network exists. And they will rise. Watch for the signs. Watch for the children of the Reich in the halls of power. Watch for the subtle spread of their ideology, repackaged and renamed. They won't call it Nazism next time. They'll call it something the world can accept, but it will be the same poison. How will we know them? By their obsessions, Hoffmann said. Racial purity disguised as nationalism. Strength disguised as security. Unity disguised as conformity. They'll target the weak, the different, the other, and they'll make people cheer while they do it. Another explosion, the sound of Russian voices shouting in the distance. Go, Hoffmann commanded. Live, remember, and stop them. Alexei hesitated one moment longer, then turned and ran toward the Soviet lines. Behind him, he heard a single gunshot. He didn't look back. The 1st of May 1945, M-Men, 3:22 a.m. Soviet Command Post, Karlshorst, Berlin. General Dmitry Volkov, no relation to Alexei, sat behind a desk in what had been a German administrative building, now the temporary headquarters of the Soviet occupation. He was a bear of a man with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much war. Alexei stood before him, exhausted, filthy, but alive. The photographs and Hoffman's folder lay on the desk between them. "A double," the general said. Not quite a question. "Yes, sir." "And Hitler escaped?" "Yes, sir." The general picked up one of the photographs, the one showing the navigation chart to Argentina. He studied it for a long moment, then set it down carefully. "Captain Volkov," he said slowly, "I believe you." Alexei felt a surge of relief. Finally, someone. "But I cannot report this." The relief turned to ice. "Sir?" "Think, Captain," the general said wearily. "The Americans and British want Hitler dead. A clean ending to the war. If we claim he escaped, they'll think we're manufacturing propaganda to justify keeping our forces in Germany. Stalin himself wants to announce Hitler's death. It's a victory, proof that Soviet forces conquered Berlin. If we say the body is a fake, it is a fake," Alexei insisted. "I know, but truth is less important than politics." The general stood and walked to the window, looking out at the ruined city. "We found bodies in the garden this afternoon, burned beyond recognition. We'll do dental analysis, and I'm certain the records will match. Because the records are fake, too. Everything is fake. Everything is theater. Then what do we do?" The general turned back to him. "We play the long game. We document everything you found. We keep it in the archives. We watch. And we wait." "For what?" "For Phoenix to rise," the general said grimly. "And when it does, we'll be ready. Your evidence will be our weapon. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. And Hitler? He just escapes? Lives free? For now." The general's face was stone. "But men like Hitler never truly escape, Captain. His own paranoia will be his prison. He'll spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, wondering if we're coming for him. That's its own kind of justice." Alexei wanted to argue, wanted to insist they pursue Hitler immediately. But he was exhausted, and he could see the logic in the general's strategy. Sometimes the long game was the only game. "There's something else," the general said. "Something you should know." He pulled out another document and handed it to Alexei. It was an intercepted German radio transmission, sent at 11:47 p.m. on April 30th. "Phoenix confirms departure. Primary asset airborne. Destination, Atlantic. Secondary assets secured. Network activation begins. Phase 1, Heil Phoenix." "They're already implementing it," Alexei breathed. "Yes. And we'll be watching. Every name in that folder, every location, every bank account, will track them all. It will take years, maybe decades, but we'll map their entire network." The general placed a hand on Alexei's shoulder. "You've done something remarkable today, Captain. You've exposed the greatest conspiracy of our time. But exposing it and stopping it are two different things. For now, we document. We watch. We wait. And when the time is right, we strike. And if we fail, then in 50 years, the world will face a new Reich. Different faces, different methods, but the same evil." The general's grip tightened. "We can't let that happen. Your mission isn't over, Captain. It's only beginning."